What does it really take? I mean, really take, for a nation to build a truly representative democracy, especially, after decades of conflict, deep internal divisions, and just constantly shifting political landscapes? It's a huge challenge globally. And today, you and I are diving deep into one of the most, well, compelling case studies out there. Somalia, welcome to the deep dive. This is where we cut through all the noise, sift through the information to give you the clearest, most insightful take on complex topics. So, our mission today to really get into Somalia's journey towards becoming a modern democratic state. We'll look at its constitutional goals, the very winding road of its elections, and the huge hurdles it's still facing. And we've got a good stack of sources to help us do that. We're talking the foundational stuff like the 1960 and 2012 constitutions, plus some really sharp policy briefs and analyses from places like the Heritage Institute for Policy Studies, Safer World, and even the EU Election Expert Mission. The goal here is simple: give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. By the end of this, you'll have a solid grasp of the core dynamics, plus maybe a few surprising facts along the way. Okay, let's unpack this. It's really a story of huge ambition, deeply rooted tradition, and just the incredible, sometimes heartbreaking resilience of people striving for self-determination.
Yeah, and what's truly fascinating when you look closely at those foundational documents is how they laid out such a progressive vision early on. But that vision has been constantly reshaped, challenged, sometimes even, undermined by the realities on the ground, by those deeply entrenched social structures. That tension, that's really at the heart of Somalia's story.
It really is. So let's rewind. Go right back to the start. Somalia's birth as an independent nation. What kind of vision did that 1960 constitution actually lay out for this new republic?
The 1960 Constitution was, well, pretty remarkable for its time. It clearly established Somalia as independent, fully sovereign, representative, democratic, and importantly, a unitary republic. And the critical part, I think, is that it explicitly stated sovereignty belongs to the people. That's a powerful statement right there. It also set Islam as the state religion and defined the national symbols, the azure flag, the white star.
So right from the very beginning, a really strong emphasis on popular sovereignty and fundamental rights too. What kind of freedoms did it actually guarantee for citizens back then?
Oh, absolutely. It was incredibly comprehensive on rights. Part 2, fundamental rights and duties of the citizen. I mean, it laid out protections that would be considered advanced for many places even now. Things like the right to vote, and it specified, personal, equal, free, and secret, access to public office, personal liberty, and very significantly, it explicitly prohibited slavery or servitude.
Wow.
Yeah, freedoms of where you live, your mail, freedom to associate, and what's maybe even more surprising for that era, it actually recognized the right to strike.
The right to strike back in 1960.
Exactly. And underpinning all of it was this strong principle of social equality, declaring that all persons are equal in social dignity. It wasn't just a basic outline. It was a deeply aspirational document.
That's a really powerful foundation to start with. And maybe that's the key insight here, right? Somalia began its journey with this blueprint that was in many ways ahead of its time. It showed this foundational commitment to democratic ideals that, well, future generations would struggle to actually live up to. But as we know, constitutions, even the best ones, they evolve, sometimes quite dramatically.
Indeed, they do. And that evolution really brings us to the 2012 Provisional Constitution. Now, this document marked a really significant shift, almost transformative, you could say. It declared Somalia a federal, sovereign, and democratic republic, but now it explicitly founded it on inclusive representation of the people, a multi-party system, and social justice. It really doubled down on human rights, the rule of law, and a clear separation of powers.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting for me, because that move to a federal structure and explicitly calling out a multi-party system, that signals a massive change. How did this new constitution actually structure the government?
Well, it set up a bicameral federal parliament. So 2 houses. You have the House of the People, that's 275 members, and ideally they're elected directly by the people. And then there's the upper house, that's designed for no more than 54 members, also ideally elected directly, but by the people of the federal member states, the FMS. And the key there is equal representation for each FMS. The President of the Federal Republic, that's the head of state, is then elected by both houses of parliament together. Usually needs a 2/3 majority in the early rounds, or a simple majority if it goes to a final round.
Okay, so a president elected by parliament. And what about the day-to-day running of the government, the executive, and the courts, the judiciary?
Right. Executive power rests with the Council of Ministers. Yeah. That's led by the Prime Minister, who's appointed by the President. The PM's job is basically to direct government policy and, coordinate what all the ministries are doing. On the judicial side, the Constitution requires establishing a constitutional court. That's meant to be the final word on constitutional matters, and also a judicial service commission. Plus, it calls for other independent bodies, things like a Human Rights Commission, an Anti-Corruption Commission, an Ombudsman, all really critical pieces for strengthening democracy and accountability.
So it sounds like a very detailed, very modern framework, federal, democratic, multi-party state. But it really begs the question, doesn't it? How do these grand constitutional ideals actually play out on the ground, especially in a country with such deep-rooted traditions and, well, clan structures?
And that's exactly where we hit one of Somalia's most persistent dilemmas. Despite these modern constitutional plans, a really defining feature has been this continued reliance on clan-based power sharing, specifically what everyone calls the 4.5 formula.
Okay, let's unpack that 4.5 system for everyone listening. It's such a core part of Somali political reality, but I think it's often misunderstood outside the country.
Absolutely. It's crucial to grasp. The 4.5 formula is essentially a pragmatic, though definitely controversial way to divide up political representation. It gives equal shares of political power seats in parliament, cabinet posts to the four major clans. That's the Darude, Hawai, Dir, and Rahanwain. And then it gives a half share, the 0.5, to a kind of combined group of smaller minority clans.
A half share.
Yeah. And the key thing here, the real insight, is that even though it's not actually mentioned anywhere in the 2012 Provisional Constitution, this 4.5 system has consistently been the way seats are allocated in the House of the People and the Council of Ministers. It's a direct reflection of these deep cultural values, a largely patriarchal system, and it effectively prioritizes clan identity over, say, individual merit or national party platforms.
You can see how it might seem pragmatic, maybe even necessary, to manage competing interests, especially right after conflict. But looking at it another way, doesn't it also kind of cement those very divisions, make true national unity or even the growth of modern political parties much harder, and maybe limit individual political choice too?
That's precisely the tension. It absolutely does.
So how has this system specifically affected the journey towards, actual elections?
Well, it creates this constant push and pull. I mean, Somalia actually had multi-party politics way back in the 1960s. There was a 123-member parliament elected from 42 districts. But efforts later on to achieve universal suffrage, one person, one vote, they just stalled. The starkest example maybe is the 2016-17 elections. Somalia actually had to abandon the plan for one person, one vote right before it happened. It just couldn't do it. Partly inadequate preparations, but also massive security concerns. So instead, they had to revert to an indirect model.
An indirect model. Okay, what did that actually look like? How did it work?
Instead of everyone voting, only about 14,000 delegates, specifically 14,025, which works out to 51 delegates for each parliamentary seat, they were the ones selected to choose the members of the House of the People. And then the upper house members were elected by the parliaments of the federal member states. So definitely a step back from that constitutional ideal of direct election.
And what were the consequences of going indirect like that? It sounds like a system that could be easily manipulated.
It was, yeah. The 2016-17 process, it was really fraught with challenges, heavily criticized by observers. For one thing, it lacked a clear legal basis to begin with, and the body set up to handle disputes, this ad hoc Independent Electoral Dispute Resolution Mechanism, or IEDRM. Well, it didn't really have any teeth. It lacked authority. And reports show it was even overruled by something called the National Leadership Forum, which isn't even a constitutional body itself.
So powerful figures could just ignore the official process.
It seems that way in practice. Plus, there were just widespread reports of money playing a huge corrupting role, vote buying, basically, manipulation of the delegate lists themselves. And, as we touched on, a big failure to meet that 30% quota for women's representation. Women only got about 24% of seats in both houses. It really shows how easily these traditional or ad hoc systems can be captured when strong democratic institutions aren't fully established.
Right. So if we connect this all together, the big picture here seems to be this complex web. These fundamental tensions, constitution versus clan, modern ideals versus traditional power, they aren't separate issues. They constantly feed into each other, creating this deeply entrenched barrier to actually achieving one person, one vote.
That's absolutely the crux of it.
So what are the most critical interconnected challenges that are really standing in the way?
Yeah, the journey towards direct universal suffrage faces, well, numerous hurdles, and they are definitely interconnected. First off, there's a critical lack of legal and institutional frameworks. It sounds dry, but it's huge.
Hmm.
Somalia is still missing key laws, things like a proper citizenship law, civil registration, effective anti-corruption laws, rules on campaign financing, all absolutely essential for fair elections. And the provisional constitution itself, still not finalized. That creates all sorts of dangerous ambiguities.
And having a functional legal system, independent institutions, that's absolutely vital for fair elections, isn't it? Like you mentioned the Constitutional Court earlier. How does not having one specifically undermine things?
Precisely. Without that constitutional court, there's no independent, impartial referee to settle electoral disputes when they inevitably arise. So what happens? Political disagreements often get sorted out through backroom deals or by the political players themselves, which is just ripe for manipulation and bias. And frankly, sources suggest some politicians have actively avoided establishing the court because, well, they fear it might actually limit their executive power. Then you have these ongoing debates over citizenship laws, too. Some clans worry that if you define Somali citizen too broadly, it might let relatives from across borders vote, potentially shifting political power in unpredictable ways.
Okay, so legal and institutional gaps are one huge piece. What about the most sort of immediate and visible threat? Security. Al-Shabaab is still a major force.
Insecurity is just a colossal, overarching obstacle. You can't overstate it. Al-Shabaab controls significant chunks of territory, especially in the south and center, and they frequently carry out destabilizing attacks, suicide bombings, assassinations. So trying to organize nationwide popular elections, which means large public gatherings, thousands of polling stations across the country, becomes incredibly difficult to secure. It's logistically a nightmare in many areas, and frankly, just too dangerous. Any big gathering of voters becomes an immediate potential target. It complicates everything, from registering voters to just counting the ballots safely.
A massive physical barrier. And then what about political will? Are the leaders, the people in power, and those who want to be, are they genuinely committed to moving beyond the clan system towards something more modern, more inclusive?
Well, many observers, and our sources point to this too, highlight a significant lack of political will as a major blocker. It seems, according to these analyses, that many politicians, both incumbents and those aspiring to power, actually find the existing clan system quite convenient. It works for them in their pursuit of power and representation for their group. There's a real fear, it seems, that a genuine shift to multi-party elections based on universal suffrage could seriously dilute their own clan's influence in parliament.
So they benefit from the status quo, essentially.
That appears to be the calculation for many. We saw this play out quite clearly back in 2019. A parliamentary committee was looking at electoral models. They actually rejected a proposal for a proportional representation system, where seats are allocated based on a party's total vote share, which tends to encourage more diverse voices and national parties. Instead, they opted for a first-past-the-post system. That's where the candidate with the most votes in a specific geographic district wins everything for that seat. And that type of system often just reinforces existing local power structures, which in Somalia often means clan constituencies.
It sounds like a cycle, then internal disagreements just constantly pulling things back, preventing real progress.
It really does feel like that sometimes. These continued squabbles between the federal government, the FGS, and the federal member states, the FMS, they frequently stall everything. There are deep disagreements over which electoral model to use, how to manage security, how to share resources, and sometimes the FMS leaders just outright refuse to implement federal electoral laws they don't like, creating this really fragmented approach. And finally, there's another critical challenge, one that's maybe less visible but just as important, a profound lack of civic education. Think about it. After decades without universal suffrage, many ordinary citizens just haven't had the chance to learn about democratic processes. They might lack a basic understanding of their rights, how elections are supposed to work, or the real impact voting could have on their daily lives. How can you have a functioning democracy if people aren't equipped to participate meaningfully?
You're absolutely right. It's not just about the laws and the politicians. The society itself plays this enormous role. But a nation's story isn't only about what happens inside its borders, is it? Somalia's narrative is also deeply shaped by its diaspora, those who left and, in many cases, are now returning. How do they fit into this really complex picture?
Yeah, the diaspora's role is definitely significant, and it's quite multifaceted. On the one hand, many Somalis from the diaspora are coming back, and they bring invaluable skills, education, expertise, and often financial resources. They're playing a big part in reconstruction and development efforts. And those financial remittances, money sent home, they were estimated at around 1.6 billion US dollars a year back in 2012. That's a crucial lifeline for countless families, and it helps sustain the economy.
So a positive contribution in many ways.
Yes, but it's not always straightforward. Their return is often described as circular, meaning they might come back for a while, maybe take up positions, but don't always stay permanently. And this can sometimes lead to tensions with locals. There can be perceptions, rightly or wrongly, that the diaspora returnees feel superior or maybe aren't fully committed long term. So it's this complex dynamic of both bringing aid and sometimes creating friction.
Interesting. And what about the participation of women? We touched on that failed 30% quota earlier. Despite the Constitution saying equality is protected, what are the persistent barriers they still face?
Yeah, despite those constitutional guarantees and that mandated 30% quota for parliament, women remain really significantly underrepresented. And this isn't just about political leaders not trying hard enough. It runs deeper into societal issues. You have cultural barriers, sometimes interpretations of religious norms, combined with a political culture that is still very male-dominated. Plus, women often have much less access to the resources needed to campaign effectively, the money, the networks. Just as an example, think about the cost of running for president. In a recent election, the registration fee alone was $40,000 US dollars. That kind of barrier likely contributed to the fact that only one woman even put her name forward. It just illustrates a very clear structural disadvantage that goes beyond just laws on paper.
$40,000. Wow. Okay, so given all these deep interconnected complexities, the legal gaps, the security nightmare, the clan politics, the social barriers, the FGS, FMS disputes, it really feels like Somalia is at a critical crossroads. What do the experts, the sources we looked at, actually recommend? What's the path forward to genuinely move towards a more democratic, more unified future?
Well, there's a fair bit of consensus emerging from the various analyses. First and foremost, pretty much everyone agrees on the need for urgent, inclusive dialogue. Getting all the key stakeholders, the FGS, the FMS leaders, the political parties, civil society around the same table is paramount. And the federal government needs to show real strong leadership in making these discussions happen. Critically, there needs to be a firm public commitment that the next elections will be the absolute last indirect ones. Universal suffrage has to be the non-negotiable goal for all subsequent cycles after that.
Okay, so a clear commitment to end indirect elections, that's a big step. What about the practical steps needed on the ground to make one person, one vote actually feasible next time?
Right, because commitment alone isn't enough. Experts strongly recommend prioritizing local-level elections first, using a kind of bottom-up approach.
Why local first?
The thinking is that holding local elections first can help build public confidence in the electoral process. It lets you identify problems and errors in the system on a smaller scale before you try a massive national election. And it also gives political parties a chance to actually develop and build support at the grassroots level, rather than just being elite bargains at the top. Alongside that, they stress the absolute necessity of finalizing the provisional constitution, finally establishing that constitutional court to resolve disputes fairly, completing all those crucial legislative reforms, citizenship, electoral boundaries, anti-corruption, and, very importantly, investing heavily and consistently in civic education to empower ordinary citizens to participate.
And none of this sounds cheap. Elections are expensive anywhere, but in a post-conflict nation like Somalia, rebuilding everything. What about the sheer cost of all this?
You're absolutely right. The cost of elections is substantial, especially in a post-conflict setting like Somalia. It almost always requires significant support from international donors. Just as a benchmark, those 2016-17 indirect elections, they received about $13 million from international partners. Estimates for running a full, direct, one-person, one-vote election across the whole country, they're talking over $61 million.
Shirikati 1 million.
Yeah. So the challenge isn't just finding that money, though that's hard enough given Somalia's fragile economy. It's also about managing those funds transparently and efficiently, making sure the investment actually produces tangible democratic results. And ideally, increasing domestic contributions over time, too, so it's sustainable. It's a huge financial undertaking.
So we've journeyed from those really hopeful, ambitious declarations back at independence through decades of turmoil to the incredibly intricate, often frustrating realities of trying to build a nation, a democracy in modern Somalia. It's a path marked by these amazing constitutional visions, but also the persistent shadow of traditional power sharing and this determined, yet just so challenging, road towards universal suffrage.
Exactly. And the story of Somalia is electoral crossroads. It isn't just about political models or institutions. At its heart, it's about people striving, yearning for a voice, trying to balance stability with progress, and navigating this incredibly complex web of internal pressures like clan politics and external pressures, like insecurity from groups like al-Shabaab. It really is a testament to that enduring struggle for self-determination against enormous odds.
So here's something for you to think about after this deep dive. When you consider everything we've discussed, the profound internal divisions, those deeply entrenched traditions, the constant, very real security threats, what do you think is the single most critical ingredient needed? Is it unwavering political will from the Somali leaders? Is it massive public education that truly empowers every single citizen? Or is it sustained, strategically focused international support? What's the one thing that will finally unlock the promise of one person, one vote for the Somali people and help truly unify their nation? It's a tough question with no easy answers. Something to ponder.